Picking a quarter off the ground once saved my life. What is your most lucky experience? Story 1. I think this happened in ninth grade. I was just lying on my bed using my laptop. I'd been like that for hours and I suddenly decided I was hungry and went to grab a snack from the kitchen. When I was in the kitchen, I heard a loud crash and I ran back into my room. My ceiling fan had fallen right where my head had been a minute ago. My cat had also been on the bed, but thankfully she was far enough away that it didn't hit her, although it certainly freaked her out. So I'm alive, but I now have a healthy fear of ceiling fans. Story 2. I once had an allergic reaction that saved my life. My wisdom tooth removal got screwed up and a giant cyst formed in my neck. Not being able to tell this from the swelling, I let it go until it got really bad. I called the dentist and he put me on some antibiotics. I had an allergic reaction and went to the hospital when my throat closed up. They did an imaging and found that the cyst was just about to dump all of its delicious goo into my carotid artery, something that would have likely killed me. Yay, allergies. So when I showed up at the ER, no one knew I was having an allergic reaction. I'd never taken that antibiotic before and had no history with them. So the doc examining me and prepping me for emergency surgery thought that the swelling was all part of the Ludwig's angina, the condition where infection travels into the gaping hole in your mouth, and told me the only way he could operate was by giving me a tracheotomy since I couldn't breathe lying down. So I went under and came back with a giant slice out of my neck and a hole in my throat. We didn't find out I was allergic to the antibiotic until about a week and a half later when the damn thing started to reform and they gave me the same antibiotic as well as a handful of Percocet. The swelling, which had barely gone down since the surgery, happened much more immediately, and they gave me 3 variations of Benadryl to get the swelling down. By the way, mixing a painkiller with extra strength Benadryl is crazy. I watched myself watch Nightmare Before Christmas. However, by the end of that day, almost all of the swelling was gone, and with the bandage on my neck, it just looked like I got cut really bad, aside from the gaping hole in my throat. Story 3. I was driving with my friends, and one asked to go to Arby's at the last second. It was on the left in the middle of the block, so I turned left, and just after we cleared the intersection, I heard a car gunning the engine. The car that was behind me was barreling towards the cars parked at the stoplight and plowed into the car that was right in front of me. The driver had a seizure or something. My fat friend saved my ass. Story 4. When I was younger, I loved climbing this huge pine tree that grew next to my garage. However, with pine trees, the branches dry and become really brittle, so I fell out of it several times, accidentally putting my weight on a branch that couldn't hold me. After the 4th time I fell out of the tree and broke a finger, I was forbidden to climb that tree ever again. Being a 10-year-old boy, I couldn't obey this tyrannical rule. I waited for my parents to go to work, then I climbed it one last time. Of course, a branch snapped. On the way down, I hit a thick branch and flipped end over end before slamming into the ground. Groaning in the bushes, I rolled over to my side to see a piece of steel rebar sticking up next to me, right under my armpit, about 3 inches from piercing my torso. I was almost impaled on a piece of old fence. This terrified me to no end for years. I had nightmares of falling towards a rusty rebar spear in slow motion. I think that if I hadn't hit that other branch on the way down or even went off that branch in the other direction, I would have speared myself and laid there dying for hours. Story 5. Alright, so my mother used to swear that this entire story is because of divine intervention. It's a cool story either way. I lived in a trailer park for most of my childhood, and in my small town, which was almost too new to have many stick-built houses, the trailer park was actually rather nice. Well-kept lawns, gardens, etc. We lived there until I was about 14, at which point my parents were considering moving to a town 40 miles away. My mother was all for it, but my father was against it. We drove by this one white house in my town, beautiful lawn, trees, etc. The previous owners really took care of it. My mother offhandedly said, now if that house ever came up for sale, we could stay in this town. 2 weeks later, it went up for sale. 2 weeks after that, we won the bid for it. A week after that, we sold our old house and moved into the new one. And a week later, the trailer park we had been living in was destroyed by an F4 tornado. We watched the tornado happen from our back porch before we watched the trampoline come flying out of the yard like a frisbee and decided to take cover. We spent most of that night at the local clinic. My mom and dad were EMT certified, so they were needed to help the survivors. I was in charge of keeping the little kids calm who had been in their house when it flipped over 12 times and they still couldn't find their parents. It was all over the news, the first time my little town of 1,500 had ever been on national television. It took weeks of effort from everyone in the town to clean up and get FEMA houses in there. I spent a lot of time handing out food at the local gym. The house we moved out of was never found. The frame was completely missing. The gentleman who bought our house was one of the 2 casualties. That week, a big news syndicate ran a feature story about the devastation, with the basis for the story being that the journalist had seen a wooden plank with the words, "Give us this day" on it in the middle of the destruction. The wood above our dining room said, "Give us this day our daily bread." Story 6. In 1994, when I was around 17 years old, I was attempting to cross an intersection in my slow '82 Chevy Chevette. I didn't see the car until a few seconds before it T-boned the driver's side of my car, but I was able to hit the gas just enough so that when the other car hit mine, it smashed the backseat area of the car. If I had connected with the front seat area, I could have easily been paralyzed or killed, but instead, I had what the doctors called a jam thigh bone. I didn't even break anything, but I still had to use crutches for a few weeks. Story 7. When I was still a toddler, I had escaped my sister's ever-watchful gaze and went outside where my dad was fixing the roof. He didn't notice me come out. According to our neighbor who witnessed the whole thing, I was standing right next to his ladder when he dropped his huge mallet directly where I was standing. Luckily, seconds before this happened, my cat came out of the backyard and I had waddled over to pet her. Story 8. When I was about 7 years old, I fell through the ice on the lake behind my house. I was wearing ice skates, which made it hard to tread water with heavy blades on my feet. The closest house to where I fell through happened to be the home of a fireman who was in his driveway packing his truck for a fishing trip and happened to hear me yelling. He got there just in time to see me struggling to keep my head above water. The ice just kept breaking away every time I tried to hoist myself up and threw me a hose to pull me in like a goddamn fireman. Story 9. Not me, but my super awesome granddad. He always used to say that being a red-blooded American teenager saved his life in World War II. He was a ball turret gunner stationed in Italy. Ball turret gunners had some of the lowest life expectancies in the Army Air Corps as they were constantly exposed to enemy gunfire. Since the job was so dangerous, gunners got certain perks. One of those perks was a nice bicycle. Granddad was riding around Italy when he saw this amazingly gorgeous Italian woman. She was the hottest woman he had ever seen. He did what any 18-year-old boy would do. He stared at her. Then he fell. He broke his collarbone and was hospitalized. He was scheduled for a flight later that day, but obviously couldn't go up. That flight was shut down and all crew were killed. And so I thank my lucky stars every day that Granddad had a thing for hot Italian chicks. Otherwise, I wouldn't exist. Story 10. When I was in high school, I was supposed to go out to my family's lake house for the weekend, but my mom ended up getting food poisoning and we couldn't go. My boyfriend was having a party that night, and I decided to just drive over there and ended up walking in on him cheating on me. The lucky part, I guess, is that I was so in love with this guy, I probably would have married him right after graduation and been the wife of a drug-addicted asshole who has spent more time in jail than out since then. Story 11. I was driving to a cabin with my mom last summer when we noticed a pack of wolves in the middle of the dirt road we were on. There was a forest on either side of us, so we couldn't go around until they moved. We sat there for at least half an hour as they walked up to the car and stared at us. It was the coolest experience I had last year. Once they decided to go back into the woods, we continued driving. Once on the highway, we got stuck in a ton of traffic and started resenting the wolves. Turns out, 20 minutes earlier, there was a 10-plus car pileup involving an oil tanker and an explosion. Chances are we would have been involved if not for the wolves. Story 12. I was a passenger in the car driving back home with my two friends a few years ago in the wintertime. My buddy was too tired to drive at one point, so he pulled over in the right-hand shoulder and we switched. I took a look to my left, and as I was about to pull out, car in drive, taking foot off the brake, I realized that I hadn't adjusted my rearview mirror. So I adjusted it and saw two things: my friend laying across the back seat taking a nap, and a green call hauling ass in the shoulder heading directly towards us. The car must have been going 80-plus miles per hour since it was going faster than everyone in the right and left lane. I immediately hit the brake again, and the second I did, the lady gently sideswiped us. She lost control of her car, did 2 complete spins, and rolled off the side of the thoroughway, down a hill, wedging herself between 2 trees. There were only some minor scrapes on the side of our car. Her car, totaled. If I hadn't looked at the rearview mirror, 2 things could have happened. We would have gotten hit down while stationary, and my friend would have been a serious projectile, or we would have gotten T-boned and been just as fucked up. And the best part? My friend woke up after the car got swiped, groggily saying, "What happened?" and then watching the horror on his face when he saw this lady's car get owned. She was totally fine, by the way. Story 13. This is a story about my older brother Jack, younger brother Dan, and father. They were vacationing in Scotland. At the time, they were both avid hikers and wanted to traverse the mountains there. It was an extremely windy day, even for Scotland, and they were having a bit of trouble making it up their trail for the day. Dan had to hold on to my dad's jacket to keep from being blown over. Still, they managed to make slow progress. Now, towards the top of the mountain, there was a lookout they decided to stop at. My dad and little brother sat down to get some rest while Jack leaned against a large boulder. It was a beautiful view, right on the edge of a cliff, and you could see for miles. As they were relaxing, there was a loud noise, and suddenly the boulder shifted and started rolling. It went over my father's leg, who yelled out in pain. The shifting rock made my older brother off balance, and he started to fall backward off the cliff. He locked his fearful eyes with my father, who didn't have time to do anything as he fell. It was a knowing look, a look that said, "Goodbye, I love you, it's okay." My little brother was too shocked to react quickly enough either. At that exact moment, a huge gust of wind blew behind Jack, pushing him up enough to regain his balance. He then ran to my dad and little brother, embracing them. My dad's leg ended up being broken, and they took a long time getting back down the mountain with Jack supporting him. They ended the trip that day, heading back to the US. I cry every single time I think about this story. My brother is my hero, and I don't know what I would have done without him if he had actually fallen that day. Nature and luck were with him. Story 14. When I was growing up, it was my July 5th tradition to go to the side of the city's fireworks display, publicly accessible about a block from my house, and root around to see what I could find. Usually there'd be some cannon fuse, green, slow-burning fuse, and some awesome-looking pieces of burnt cardboard. There'd usually be small, undetonated, half-an-inch diameter cylinders about an inch long made of cardboard with small, fast-burning fuses sticking out at the end. I was familiar with these small fireworks. I'd been finding them for years. You know those fireworks that explode into spiraling white sparks? They were unexploded spinning spark clusters. The fuse was incredibly short, so as soon as a flame was touched to them, they'd spin and shoot harmless sparks out of the end. One year I discovered what seemed to be a much larger version of these spark clusters. It was about 2 inches in diameter and 6 inches long. It seemed to be made of the same material, brown cardboard with clay blocking the ends. The same fast-burning fuse was sticking out of the end. I returned to my friend's house and we started firing off all of our loot, mostly the small spark bombs and a few other goodies. Now, when it was time for the grand finale, I pulled out the gigantic spark cluster and put it on the ground. I lit the lighter, held the flame out towards the fuse, and stopped myself. I realized that I wouldn't have a good view of all the sparks if I was so close. So I looked around and found a bottle rocket that we hadn't fired yet with a 1.5-inch green fuse and rested it on top of the large cylinder. Surely, 1.5 inches of fuse would be enough for me to get a good view of the sparks. I lit it and turned. I was wrong. I made it maybe 10 feet before this thing fucking exploded. Now, I don't mean exploded in the whoa, that was awesome sense. I mean exploded in the where is my shirt and why is there a hole in the asphalt sense. My friend and I instantly ran into the house, safe from the inevitable police arrival, and ran upstairs laughing the whole time. It wasn't until we got upstairs that I realized that my shirt had been torn off. Later inspection of the detonation site revealed a 1-inch shallow crater in the asphalt about 8 inches wide. If I hadn't added that bottle rocket, I would have, at best, lost an arm. Story 15. Oh man, I've had my share of near misses, but I think this one takes the cake. I was at this nightclub with a few buddies. It was a really shady nightclub, the kind with lots of fights, drugs, and all that fun stuff. I only went because it was a $3 beer night, so I'm just doing my thing and I spot out a pretty foxy-looking young lady holding a drink and dancing by herself. We chit-chat a little and we're both a little tipsy at this point. As we're making some good conversation, I notice a guy who looks exactly like Will Ferrell walk by in the background, and mind you, I was drunk, so my mind may have been playing tricks on me. I tilt my head to the side to get a closer look, and right when I do that, a fist scrapes by my ear from behind. Turns out the girl had a boyfriend and he wasn't too happy about me chatting up his special lady. But since he missed the hit and he was pretty drunk himself, he stumbled and collapsed on me. Story 16. My family and I used to go on hikes a lot. When I was little, we trekked into a wild, no-trail mountain. It had rained the day before, so the ground was still muddy. We were walking on a ledge with no guardrails and wet mud. As soon as my mom warned me to be careful not to slip, I slipped and fell off the ledge that was about 70 degrees an angle and at least a couple 100 feet down. Then, miraculously, my dad jumped and grabbed me by my shirt with one hand and a tree with another and pulled me up using both of his arms. I only had a few scratches and was okay thanks to my Superman dad and his he's Asian, reflexes. Story 17. Once, when I was at the beach, happily swimming like any regular kid, a $20 bill hit me in the face. For some reason, I had my mouth open, so a soaking wet $20 bill basically just tried to murder me. I opened my mouth, got it out, and freaked out to go show my parents. Now, remember, I was something like 7 years old at the time, so $20 was like winning the lottery. My parents told me they would hold on to it, and when I went back to play in the water when the unbelievable happened, another $20 bill floated by me, this one deciding not to jump down my throat. To this day, I'm convinced there was a bank heist somewhere in the area and little cheese in-flight happened to cash in. Story 18. I finally have a relevant story, but nobody will see it at this point. I'm going to type it anyway because it's just an awesome story. My grandpa had a farm when I was a kid. My brother and I liked to pester the cows in the field with fireworks. One day, we're out shooting bottle rockets at them. My brother was about 20 feet closer to the cows than I was. One of the bottle rockets exploded right on the back of a bull, which made it turn, drop its head with horns, and charge at my brother from about 50 feet away. I just happened to be lighting the fuse of the bottle rocket in my hand and tossed it in the air in the direction of the bull before I even realized what was happening. It flew directly at the bull and exploded right between his eyes. The explosion scared it enough to stop it right in its tracks and turn around to run away from us. It wasn't until much later that I realized that I probably saved my brother's life. Story 19. One day during the summer a few years ago, I was riding my bike from campus to my house. Now I had one of those cheap Walmart fixies, so as I was getting up to cruising speed, the chain popped off the gear and I coasted to the sidewalk to fix it. I look up and see that right about where I would have been down the street, a semi heading down the main road collided with a car stopped at the intersection and smashed into a car parked on the side of the road. Now, if the chain hadn't broken, I would have been waiting for the light between the parked car and the car that got hit when it happened. A similar thing happened again a year later. I was driving to campus since I had moved farther away when I noticed my tire was going flat, so I went to fill it up at the gas station. While there, I lost one of my quarters that I was feeding into the air machine. When I took off to head out of the parking lot, I saw it sitting about 15 feet from where I was filling up the tire. I stopped the car and go out to get the quarter. I was a broke college student, don't judge. And when I turned around, a car careened into a guy stopped at the intersection of the road I was about to pull out into. If I hadn't stopped to pick up the quarter, I would have been at the intersection right in the final resting place of both the cars. Story 20. One time, I was choking on a steak outside when a random neighborhood dog that was lost noticed I was choking and started barking like crazy. My parents noticed just in time to help me. Story 21. There was a time when I was mowing the lawn next to my driveway. I was turning the mower around to do another strip of grass when I itched the side of my head, covering my right eye with the back of my right hand. Right as I did this, a rock shot from the side of the mower and hit the back of my hand right where my eye was. I still have the scar. Story 22. I used to live in Christchurch, New Zealand. One day, my girlfriend and I were having lunch in the city. We got some fried rice. $2 rice is awesome. But we forgot to buy a drink, so after we finished our meal, we lined up to get a Coke. Because it was lunchtime, it was really busy, so we decided to leave the shop and get a drink elsewhere. Now, as we left the store and walked outside, a massive earthquake hit. The shop front where we were fell in on itself, and if we had stayed in the shop for just like 30 seconds longer, we would have been in trouble.